Rana jol shikana kamthe male mali sena ke nadagan sabumati yaganna na jol shikana kamthe male mali nagamte male mali nagamte male mali nagamte male mali ya fagula fa badiya jol shikatam fi ganinda kamne ya gade nama badi gadem to nama badiya jol shikatan sabavin ku kamne birbir se kunche sani birbisa gunche sani ajol shika hargisam gunche ta'u alagan alaguma yomin le firanta yomin le firanta uye Allah tere fila faya jol shika sama baristi male hinultu dubbin rabbi ajol shika takabu bulti male takabu bulti male
Okay. This session is on religion, and everybody knows that religion has survived with the human species for a very long time. Today, it's not just religion, but it has also become a silent feature of international relations. And to the Oromo, this phenomena that we call religion is not only important, but crucial, because Oromo is the most diverse religious group that you can find in the Horn of Africa, if not Africa as a whole. The Oromo is forced to join one kind of religion or the other because it's legally demanded in Ethiopia that you have to have a religion. Otherwise, in case of death in your family, why are you laughing? Is this something new? This is nothing new, because by the legislation of 1948, the government banned burial according to the tradition. You cannot bury your dead according to the tradition. You have to either be buried at a Muslim cemetery or at a Christian cemetery. Therefore, Oromos were to bury their dead, they were forced to join one of these religion group, and therefore religion has contributed a lot to dividing them. Today we have two prominent intellectuals who are going to discuss the impact of this phenomena on the Oromo and Oromo nationalism from two perspectives. Jawar is going to discuss the interaction between Islam and Christianity as it at the same time interacts with Oromo traditional religion or belief system. Professor Iskel will be dealing with evangelical Christianity and the emergence of Oromo nationalism. And hope you all gain something from this. Thank you.
I'm going to sit here and thank you, Dr. Gamichu. Thank you for chairing it. And Dr. Gamichu is really an expert in Oromo religion. Some people call it Wak Efata, but in Oromo religion, and he probably will say something at the end. All right, my presentation is, or the topic is on evangelical Christianity and the formation of modern Oromo nationalism. When I say evangelical Christianity, I want to make what the reference to that term is. That is I'm talking about the mainline churches in the tradition of the Lutherans, the Presbyterians, and probably some of the charismatic churches that are deeply rooted in Ethiopia. I'm not referring to any Christian churches, recent charismatic and Pentecostal churches that have mushroomed all over the country. So I'm really talking about the mainline churches. That's what I mean by evangelical Christianity. And when I say the Oromo, I speak in generic terms, but what I'm referring to is the Oromo of Western Oromia, particularly Wallagga or the Macha Oromo. And when I am speaking about religion in connection with nationalism, I'm trying to explore the contribution of evangelical Christianity, that specific religious tradition within Christianity. And I'm not trying to comment on other religions. For instance, it's not a commentary on Islam. It's simply looking at the contributions of evangelical Christianity to Oromo national consciousness and national identity and the construction of nationalist ideology. It starts with this. The dominant view in the study of nationalism is that modernization is a critical precondition for the rise of popular demand for the establishment of a nation state. Implicit in this approach is the rejection of religion as a contributing factor to the development of nationalism. Following this framework, studies on Oromo nationalism have tended to exclude the contributions of religious figures to the development of the Oromo national movement, sometimes denying the slightest connection between religion and Oromo nationalism. My paper attempts to bring back religion into the analysis, into the formation of nationalism. It examines the complex relationship between evangelical Christianity and the development of Oromo nationalism. I argue that evangelical Christianity has influenced the creation of Oromo national consciousness, the creation of national identity, and the rise of national movements. And mark my words, I'm just saying contribution or influence on these processes. To support my thesis, to support my argument, I provide an overview of the contributions of two evangelical leaders, Christian evangelical leaders, one at the beginning of the nationalist resistance to Ethiopian colonialism, one almost at the same time the Oromo modern national movement was coalescing. That is Onesimos Nasib or Abagamichis, and then Godina Tumsa during the maturation of the Oromo nationalism in the early 60s, late 60s and early 70s. Before I outline, and that's what I'm going to outline, the contributions of these two evangelical leaders, I want to make three caveats about evangelical Christianity. First, evangelical Christianity was rarely, if at all, identified with Ethiopian colonialism or as something imposed by foreign colonial power. Evangelical Christianity has not colluded with Abyssinian imperialism in the destruction of Oromo culture. In fact, evangelical Christianity has much to do with the revival of the traditional Oromo culture. I could discuss that in other venues. But evangelicals or evangelical Christians, for the most part, do not believe Oromo nationalism poses a threat to their brand of Christianity, and therefore I never felt that they have to oppose Oromo, the national movement. In fact, the conquest of the Oromo and the rise of evangelical Christianity happened actually at the same time in the late 19th century. The second caveat is that, and I have written elsewhere on the meaning of conversion of the Oromo from Oromo origin to evangelical Christianity. It's in that issue, the current issue of the Journal of Oromo Studies. The argument there is that the religious message of evangelical Christianity intellectually and theologically interacted with the existing Oromo religion. And when people who belong to the Oromo religion accepted evangelical Christianity, not much change happened. In fact, the Oromo actually accepted what is compatible with their own religion. So conversion to evangelical Christianity means, from Oromo religion, is the acceptance of what is compatible with their own religion and the evangelical Christians' validation of the Oromo revelation. And in this process, the process of the transmission of the message was done not as popularly believed by European Christians, but by Oromo evangelicals themselves. So the process of proselytization was done by Oromos who themselves converted, liked the message that they have heard, and then did the work of evangelization among their people. And thirdly, Oromo evangelical missionaries did not encourage Oromo Christians to join political activities or join the resistance movement in an explicit way. But their work and ideals provided stimulation and motivation toward participation in improving the human condition. Among other things, they awakened the Oromo to realize that it was evil and unjust before God for any one nation to oppress and exploit another. Evangelical Christian leaders never intended to mobilize the Oromo for nationalism, but their work laid the groundwork for it. This is the argument of my paper. Now, that's basically what my argument is, and let me provide you the evidence whatever time I have highlighting the work of these two individuals. Now, Abagamachis and the contribution to Oromo consciousness, national consciousness. Abagamachis decisively contributed to Oromo nationalism by helping mobilize the national consciousness through literature, education, and other activities. This is really what is known. But I am not really interested in rehashing what we know about what he did in education or in literature or in standardization of language. In fact, what I am interested is in the theology of evangelical Christianity that he transmitted. What I am saying is that the subtext of the religious message itself had an undeniable effect in arousing national consciousness and aspiration for freedom. So, first, his theology of equal standing before a sovereign God for all humans became a revolutionary force in a corrupt nation where oppression and exploitation based on cultural affinity was rife. His gospel message about the worth of all human beings in the sight of God kindled a new faith in the possibilities of humans, fostered a sense of social responsibility, and consequently contributed to the development of a worthy national life. It developed in people a sturdy independence, a moral fiber, a fearless protest against political wrong. Abagamachis' message that Christianity and inequity cannot live together led the people, the Oromo people, to be justly resentful of oppression and the exploitation of people. That's number one. Two, the second contribution of Abagamachis is that Oromo nationalism is in fostering a spirit of self-reliance among the people. As soon as he settled in Wallaga, and here I've been a little anecdote here, in Wallaga in the early 20th century, Abagamachis abandoned his Western ways and identified with the local people. He changed his children's names from Barnabas, Tamar, and Dina to Gamachis, Iadate, and Galate. He abandoned sporting in his Western attire. He took off his shoes and started walking barefoot just like the local people. He refused, and this is really interesting, why he's not an ordained minister, nobody really knows. He refused to be ordained a minister because he was told by the Swedish missionaries that he would be paid only a third of what someone who went to college, seminary, a Swedish missionary was being paid. He said, well, if I'm not going to be paid just like the Swedish missionary, I will not become ordained. What is the import of all of this? Well, among the people that he lived, these practices encouraged the Oromos to regard their native culture with increased appreciation and enhance their respect for their own tradition, thus contributing to a sense of national identity. He also had a profound effect on Oromo Christians in developing and enhancing their sense of confidence, self-respect, and defense spirit, which were so vital to their survival under the humiliation of colonial domination. All right, I'll negotiate. This is a new sense. Okay, that's what I meant. It's laying the foundation for the development of national aspiration is what it does. Now, I guess there are about 5, and I'll skip a couple of them, and because I really want to say something about the Reverend Gudina as well. But in education, one thing that is really important that I want to underscore here is that the evangelical church schools that he started, with his first school that started, made considerable contribution to the formation of Oromo nationalism. And it cannot be denied that the more education the Oromo received, the more anti-Abyssinian they become. There is a reason why a disproportionate number of, for instance, the leaders of Oromo Liberation Front from the western part of Oromia are products of evangelical church education. Bagamichis preached the gospel to evangelize. That was his intention. The Oromo people responded to his message itself and to the accompanying hope of social and political liberation. All right. Then the Reverend Gudina. I think Reverend Gudina was a leading theologian and advocate of social justice. He is claimed by many groups as a leader, among them the OLF, for instance. Someone asserted that the OLF was created in his house. As many of you know, that Reverend Gudina's real connection to this case might be his brother. But here's what I want to say about the Reverend Gudina. His theology was shaped by his own formative experiences. First, he grew up in a religio-political context in which Protestant Christianity interacted with the local Oromo cosmology, creating a Christianity that showed concern for the plight of the poor and the disadvantaged. Second, he experienced injustice at an early age in feudal Ethiopia, and he made a lifetime commitment to advance the cause of justice and speak against injustice. Third, he was deeply influenced by the civil rights movement in the United States in the 1960s when he was a student at Luther Seminary, and his theological thoughts were inspired or thoughts were influenced by the American theologian Reinhold Niebuhr during his time in the United States. All of this is about a theology of national liberation. I think Jawar had been talking to me about this, and I think I published an article on this, on the theology of national liberation. For the Reverend Gudina Tumsa, politics was not his goal, or nationalism was not his clear goal. He was a prophet. He saw himself as a prophet who speaks truth to power. He's an advocate of social justice who wanted to get rid of oppression and nationalism. He was very much committed to this. His commitment to his own people, to the Oromo people, is undeniable. But his theory of liberation has some messianic, 2 minutes, messianic inclinations. I'd like to go through this, but let me say this and I will stop just on time. Gudina's theology has always connected to his national feelings. His love for the Oromo people is legendary. People who know him, including my friend Gammachu Magarsa, could testify to that. But his advocacy for freedom, speaking truth to power, for which he lost his life, and numerous Christians and non-Christians, as they strove for independence from domination, degradation, and dehumanization, his influence is undeniable. Now, if you ask me what the connection is with politics, well, his influence is not limited to even the Oromo of Ethiopia. But within Ethiopia, politically speaking, his influence was evident in the establishment of the struggle, the party called the Struggle for the Oppressed People of Ethiopia, ICHAT, which brought all people who were under the domination into the same theology of liberation, under the rubric of the general theory of liberation. That had an influence in shaping national consciousness among the Oromo. But it's not limited to that. Well, for the rest of it, I guess read the article. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Inuman tikse malekulato ashufe badalo ninga abisu Inuman rafe maleya lami tokuma dabu namara abisu Allaya nalayuma maltu allaya Nuru fajadai Alagana laguma Maltu alaga Adam firajadai Oborta ormina batu yo abano fi batate malay Roro ormarra dufte
They will be back.
Roro dinarra dufte Maltu namado Oh, abado watamale malo Biya orma adakun naman ibu galun naman ibay
Another source of revolt or resistance or opposition to mix of religion and politics is because religion, particularly in Europe and in those countries where there are more than one religion, it was seen as a source of division and conflict, and as you know, in Europe, it led to some bloody wars. And during, particularly after Reformation and during the Renaissance, and it continues until today, religion, the ideology of religion, the teaching of and its rituals were seen as a source of backwardness and retardation and an obstacle to progressive politics. These claims or accusations against religion solidified the call for separation of church and state as a dominant argument and gave birth to secularism. But however, one key point that people need to understand, we need to understand, is that on both sides of the argument, whether those who want separation of church and state or who wanted to keep them together, power was central. Those who wanted to maintain religion in politics, either as rulers themselves or as having religion as ally, wanted to utilize religion for their control purpose. While revolutionaries who opposed the role of religion in politics wanted to neutralize religion, push it out of there, and deny their opponent, the despotic rulers or the established aristocracy, the power they have over people through the religion and religious institutions. Having said that, let me get into how religion is perceived in the Oromo national movement. We observed two approaches over the last, say, 50 years since the birth of the Oromo nationalism. During the early stages, during the Majjat Ulama Association time, we observed an effort to recognize diversity and attempt at narrowing the differences. And this is story you hear about, Tahadasa Birru and Alamokitesa bringing in Muslims and Christians and making them slaughter cows together and feeding them. And this is recognition of diversity, but also trying to really disempower the role of religion. Then when the revolutionary students took over, we observed a second approach of neutralization, which is through distancing of religion from politics and suppression of religious expression and religious identity. This second and important position or strategy was influenced by a number of factors. One of the factors is religion, and these youngsters and then, today elders, being the rivals and the communists of the day, I think they bought into religion, the sign of the argument of religion as a sign of backwardness for two reasons. Number one is they were revolting against a despotic ruler that was backed by the church, And both the Oromos and non-Oromos blamed the church for legitimizing the ruler and also for holding the country politically and economically back. The second and most important that still remains among our nationalists is communism. Communism, the definition of or the characterization of religion as opium of the masses that blinds them, that makes them submissive to the rulers, I think was really taken by the heart, and our leaders and our activists at the time detested religion and they wanted to push it aside. The second factor is because Oromos are diverse, they follow various religions, the leaders and activists thought this is a divisive factor that need to be pushed aside. And also, connected to this is because the Abrahamic religions, Christianity and Islam, do not just bring religious teaching, they also bring values and cultural traits that displaces and they thought displaces and also damages Oromo heritage. Therefore, they really didn't like it. They wanted to push it aside. And as nationalism started to grow and intellectuals started to engage in the work, we observed through their literature that they felt religion is a rival to our Oromumma or to our national identity. They also recommended distancing it. And finally, in the past 15 years, during the war on terror, religion, particularly Islam, continue and start to be perceived as a liability, particularly as an attraction for enemies, global enemies. What is the reality, though? What is the reality? This anti-religious sentiment being dominant in our national movement. But what was the reality? When we look at reality, and our people really saw liberation in its totality. They look at it as one and the same, whether it's for religious liberation or national liberation. Why? Because particularly in Protestant and Muslim areas, they were oppressed both because of their religion and as well as because of their faith. Let's take the West. In the West, the Oromos struggled for the right to worship religion of their choice in their own language. That was the struggle. Why? And also, this reflects the strategies of and the motives of the government or the rulers of the time. Protestantism was suppressed by the political leaders because it stood as an obstacle to assimilationist policy, among other things. Professor Esgel earlier was talking what Hika or Abagamachis was doing. What he was doing was observed not only by Oromo peasants, but also by the colonialists. Therefore, they saw evangelism or Protestantism as preserving the Oromo culture that the colonial administrators wanted to displace and replace. Afan Oromo was suppressed at the same time in this region. Afan Oromo was targeted for suppression because it was seen as a vehicle for expansion of Protestantism. Therefore, for people who are oppressed, whose religion is oppressed, whose language is oppressed, fighting for both of them at once was really a good idea at the moment. When we go to the north, I'm talking about Wallo, and when we go to southeast, Bali, Arsi, and Hararge, and to some extent Jimma, the people were, the Islam, degradation of Islam were meant by the oppressor and also felt by the oppressed one and the same as suppression of Oromumma. The Kotu does not stand just for the Oromo of the East. The Kotu is the Islam. The Kotu is the Oromo. It has both of them. This degraded the Arusi. It is like the Muslim and the Oromo. So because the enemy was framing the question like that, and the response we see from Bakli Sapallo and other scholars of the time is that they wanted total liberation. They wanted liberation of their religion and a revelation of their nation. They didn't see it as different. One point here we learn from how the public perceived it and from what they did is that these Abrahamic religions have become part of the society, and the society really sees them as part of their identity, not as nationalists perceive it, as we perceive it. I think the people perceive themselves as Muslim Oromos, as Protestant Oromos, and because of that, they aspire to get both of them free. Contribution of religion, Professor Esgela has touched on some of them. These Abrahamic religions have really made some tremendous contribution to the struggle. Abagamachis, his connection to the church and to his work in the Protestant church enabled him to translate the Bible. What this enabled is not just expansion of Protestantism. It also had a vital role in preserving the language. Preservation of the language led to development of the language and led to the development of the movement. The church elders particularly were very important in this preservation process and in instilling the identity of Oromumma in their children. And I agree with Professor Israel that it's not without reason that most of our leaders are children of church elders. So this is an important point to note. When we come to Islam, the Oromo ulama, their dedication to spreading religion in their language, whether they intended to preserve the language or not, was essential for the development of the Oromo. Recently, Professor Dr. Abdul Samad Muhammad wrote History of the Oromo Writing System, and in that we see the Sheikhot An-Niyi and the Niyi in Raya, they were writing in Afan Oromo using the Arabic letter. And that was preserved, helping the next future researchers to work on that. And when we go to Bali, we find Sheikh Hussein rituals. The Baro was one way of carrying the history of the region, the history of the Oromo, as well as the language. Baro is exemplary because it's so rich. And now if you listen to old Baros, you learn quite a bit about the Oromos of the area. And also, of course, the scholars, the modern scholars like Sheikh Bakri and Sheikh Rashad contributed and developed the writing system we have today. For the modern movement, just 2 pointers. Religion, as we know, the religion allowed the Abyssinians connection to the West, and which led to them having the Maxim gun, having war advantage in defeating our ancestors. The same way, the religions our people had adapted also created a gateway for us when we started our movement. Our early encounters, particularly our the early days of our nationalism, you observe the sheikhs or these students who travel to study Islam in Middle East coming back as revolutionaries and nationalists, bringing guns with them. At the same time, our connection through the church to the West, particularly to Europe and the United States, created a diplomatic gateway for us and brought us where we are today. Therefore, because religion has helped us and we cannot really dismiss it, and therefore we need to start rethinking these relations, and we have to start facilitating new interactions. This is not just because of this, because religion is helping us, but also even globally, the idea of secularism is being debated and it's being challenged. This particularly the separatist Lassalle or the French model, the Turkish model of the secularism has been challenged, and an alternative model of secularism, which some are calling it accommodative secularism, is getting recognition. Among modern scholars who strongly argued for complete separation of politics from religion, or pushing religion to private sphere, they changed their mind during their lifetime. For example, John Rawls, who said religion has no role in public sphere, toward the end said religion has to have certain role in politics, particularly in policy making. So what is this new model of secularism? Principal distance. What kind of relationship should be there? Principal distant or equidistant, particularly in Oromo when we adopt it. Principal distance is the distance each religion have from our politics or political institution should be equal. We have to have respect for all of them. Mutual accommodation between politics and religion is very important. What we say by this is actually giving recognition. And instead of in the church preaching anti-politics, kind of giving room to politics and political leaders. And political leaders, instead of spying very hostile statement or resentment against religion, actually accommodating religious leaders to have certain role in how the political discourse goes. We need positive cooperation, and key is very important, particularly to avoid politicization of religion. It is essential that there is equitable participation, representation in political affairs, and the distribution of power and privilege. This is the best way to deal with it. The special case of Waqf-Fanna, and I will just conclude with that. The special case of Waqf-Fanna need to be carefully studied by all who are concerned about Oromo movement, because it's a vital and one of the few surviving heritage of our nation. That gives us a glimpse of our connection to the past. Its ongoing revival is part of and reinforces the nation building. Waqf-Fanna has been revived, not just only because it's a religion, but because its revival is also speeds up nationalism and the nation building project. It has and it might continue to have a special privilege in the emerging nation. The extent and the characteristic of that privilege requires a careful deliberation. To enjoy this status of special privilege and continue to flourish, it needs to continue being perceived, I repeat, perceived as a heritage that is owned by and embraced by all Oromos, regardless of the religious connections. Some of the Puritan, combative, and literalist approaches pushed by our nationalists and our Wakefanna brothers need to be re-examined because they do more harm than benefit. Concluding remarks, religion might be the opium of the masses. It might be a source of division. It might be retarding our society. However, we cannot really ignore it. Why? In the last 20 years or 30 years, religiosity, its supply and demand has significantly increased, particularly in poor countries. So what do we need to do? We need to get involved. If you don't use religion for good, your enemy will use to destroy you. How do we get involved? Nationalize it. Our religions, whether they're Wakefanna, Islam, Christianity, or whatever, even atheist, it has to be nationalized, domesticated. It should have a nationalistic character in it. The symbols, the worships has to have a nationalist sentiment in it. We need to infuse these religions and continue to infuse liberation theology. Professor Esgail has touched on how Reverend Kudina Tumsa done it. I can quote a number of work, a fight Sheikh Rashad had done in Somalia to make sure that Islam and Oromo are not conflicting, that to be Islam and to be Oromo is not something that are contradictory. You have to keep, there is nothing wrong in fighting for your nation. That kind of teaching need to be infused into our religious teaching. We have to prevent securitization of religion. What particularly the current government is trying to do is provoke religious institutions and religious individuals into getting into violent confrontation. Therefore, quest for religious freedom, quest for religious equality will be viewed through security to the state, security to the society. We need to prevent that. One way of doing that is, in addition to the recommendation I presented above, is really to give room in our national discourse, in our national struggle for grievances. Oromo Muslims, Oromo Christians, whatever oppression come to them, they should be able to bring it to Oromo institutions, and the Oromo institution should air that grievances. And internally, the Oromo institution should make sure that religious-based internal grievances do not develop to the level of the facilitating stopping me. They don't develop to the level of where parochial factionalism emerge along religious fault lines. I have finished. I'm not going to use your 5 minutes. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you. And thank you, not just for listening. Over the last 3-4 weeks, I've been under fire. Some of the statements that were used, I know were shocking, particularly to our Christian brothers. I had faith in you. You restored that faith. You didn't fall for the trap, and it really restored my confidence. It restored my confidence. It's a very humbling experience. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Actually, I was in street, don't bother you. Garida, but it is really very well done. I mentioned at the beginning that religion is a silent feature of international relations, and that clearly came out in Jawa's presentation. And you have also seen that the same is true with the introduction of Christianity and modern education as it transpired in the western part of Oromia. I would like to make a very brief remark on this idea of oh. Hello. Yeah, I want to make a few comments on the Wakefana aspect, which Jawar briefly touched, and this religion tends to be associated with my name wrongly. In fact, I'm a Wakefata myself, but I only disagree with how it is being used. And my opposition to how it is being used is clear back at home, and I want it to be very, very clear to you here abroad also. Wakefana will only, you would only distort both the Wakefana and the politics if you try to politicize it. And there are people who try to do that, and I want to also tell you the fact that I have been working with different religious Catholic fathers and Protestants and Muslims to find out what exactly the Oromo belief consists of for the last 40 years. And I myself don't really have the total confidence to say the difference between Oromo God, Allah, and the Western God. It requires an in-depth study of the Oromo philosophical religious concepts, and people should have the patience before they use it and abuse it in politicizing. People should be, I beg that all Oromos be aware that a lot needs to be done in this area before we start using it. And thank you. And now we have time for questions. Dr. Muhammad?
Mine is not a question, it is just confirmation of a statement Iskel made about Reverend Gudina loving the Oromo people. In 1978, while I was a graduate student in London, Reverend Gudina visited Berlin. I knew him back home, we knew each other. And when he was ready to return to the country, he gave me a call. He said, Muhammad, I'm leaving. I literally begged him not to go back to Ethiopia. And he said, wanni feete dhuftuu ummatuma keenya keessattiin waan dhufaa cufa fudhadhaa jedhe. I hope you get it. Yeah, thank you. Confirmation.
Kolcha afaan oromootiin anis gaaffii koo dhiyeessa sadan keessanuu amantii sadan walitti fidanii waan pirezentii gootaniif waan hin gaafachuu barbaadu asirratti aadaa oromoo fi amantiin sadanuu akkamittidha wal fakkaataa yookiin immoo akkamitti adda ta'a maaliif aadaan sabni aadaan qabne wal fakkaachuu yookiin immoo tokko ta'uu hin danda'u jedhee yaada aadaan amma Oromoo keessatti akkaan hagaan ani beekutti safuun isa guddaadha. Akka aadaatti of fudhanne karaa amantiis immoo safuun kabajumadha wal kabajuudhumadha. Nama ijoolleen nama guddaa akkatti kabaju kuni aadaan baaliyuun Oromoon qabu kuni akkamitti amantii wajjiniin walitti dhufee sirraa'uu danda'a jettanii yaaddaniittu kana gaaffiin koo.
I see some conflict between Oromo culture and religion in Oromia. You know, we have fought for our culture a lot. We too, and those people who have died, to preserve Gerarsa, for example, to preserve Sirba Durba. What happened was in the 1990s, a brother of one of the Oromo heroes, Yiggazu's brother, you know Yiggazu, he went back home, he went to his village, and he went to a marriage ceremony. You know, when we have marriage ceremony, when there is a marriage, there is Gerarsa, there is Sirba Durba, and it is a lot of dancing and singing by men, both by men and women. That was forbidden. I was so angry because it touched me, and I called this big priest all over, and what are you doing? Why is that happening to us? Because we have sacrificed for this culture. So tell me if there is no conflict between our culture and our religions. Those are our religions. I am not a supporter of this or that religion, but I see conflict, and how do we deal with that?
Okay, okay. Nan nufa gubba, nan nufa achin nufa. Yeah, ka asiratin kuta.
Gaaffiin koo Dr. Isqeelii fi garuu waan hir'ate waa'ee guddinaa tumsaa informatiif kan ta'e waan xinnoon itti dabaluu barbaada. Close to 71, 72, and 73, he established a committee of Oromo elites to establish a university in Western Ethiopia. He took this responsibility, and I happen to be involved in the feasibility study of this project as a chairman. Baro Tumsa and a lot of other people were among us. And he was also in a secular educational field. He was involved with that much I know. But then my question is, how do you correlate his feelings in terms of course, he's a highly regarded religious person, secular educator, and then in the end, he lost his life, assumedly being involved in politics. Could you please elucidate these relationships for us? Thank you, sir.
Okay. What we'll do is I'm going to divide this into two sessions. Let them react to the questions that we already have, and then there are people denied the chances up there. I will come back to you. Shall we start?
Yes, thank you for that question, Professor Makre and Hatamu. It's an important. It is an important question, and the reason why I present this paper is for this discussion to come out. Is there a conflict between religion and politics, or between our national, between culture and religion? Absolutely, yes. But I would call it more of a contention. Because religion doesn't, especially these foreign alien religions, they just don't bring their teaching. It's not just the Bible and the Quran that comes. Even within it contained cultural values, value systems that contradict our way of life. The starting point is this. Whether we like it or not, the vast majority of our people have embraced this Abrahamic religion. Then we have a culture that all our people have. There are these religions all our people have. How are we going to reconcile them? We cannot turn these people back to where they were when they did not have religion. Therefore, the responsibility of the intellectual, the responsibility of the activist is to find a middle ground where people practice their religion without eroding and damaging their culture. I recommend and I call for further research. The best way to reconcile them is within the church, within the mosque. It is not within the political field so much. And the best way is not to be hostile towards these religious teachings that seem to contradict our value or our culture. The best way is to approach them. I'll give you a couple of this movement within the evangelical movement. The Goodina Tumsa Foundation does. What are they doing? They are promoting evangelism, but at the same time, they are promoting Oromo cultural dressing. What we need to do is get into that. It's not only the culture. Even last 5-10 years, what we must admit is this: our religions have started to turn against our movement. Our political sentiments that politics is haram, politics is forbidden, humanity is the same. To talk about ethnicity is to be, godless. This kind of teaching is coming in. If Jawar goes and condemns this on VOA, it doesn't make a dent. But if a pastor or a sheikh do this work within the church, within the mosque, we can make a difference. It is very important to, and one point within this new discourse in secularism is, there is emphasis on multivocality of religion. In religion always has two ways. There are part of religion, both in Christianity and Islam, that tend to condemn our culture. But there is also within the same teachings that gives you the right, the instruments to justify sticking to your culture and promoting. That's what Goodina Tumsa and others were doing. That is what Sheikh Muhammad Rashad, listen to his interviews from 1960s when he was developing Afan Oromo. They said, why are you developing Afan Oromo? Why are you using Latin alphabet? Use Arabic to write this. He said, no. There was Quraysh before Islam. There is Quraysh today. There was Oromo before Islam. There is Oromo today. There is nothing wrong for fighting for you people. Right? That kind of teaching. Let me substantiate my claim. Imagine Taha Abdi saying that and Shah Muhammad Rashad saying that. It carries different weight. Taha Abdi is a politician. They say, Nik ata politika kote. Shah Muhammad Rashad says he had the knowledge, the certification, the power to say it. That kind of approach, I think, will help us.
I think the three questions that were raised about the relationship between culture and religion, they're related in many ways. And this is a topic of discussion in religious circles, in seminaries, in the relationship between culture and... So it's really a very broad subject to comment on here, but let me specifically say this with regard to the question that Haptamu raised about religion and cultural practices. That is how religious people, individuals, practice their religion in different venues, whether it's in the country or outside the country, in South Africa in this case. Now, I think what I spoke about is examining the relationship between nationalism and evangelical Christianity at certain point in time, and evaluating the contributions of two theologians. So this is not really the subject that I was trying to address, because people practice their religion not according to creed. People practice their religion in different ways. And that was exactly what I would say with Makuria's question about it's a conflict. I think you edited it to say it's a tension, it's not a conflict between Oromo culture and religion. Such a broad brush to comment on. Look, we can't take isolated incidents and generalize. We cannot simply take individual acts and attribute that to the religion. as I say it, individuals relate to the divine in their own ways, even though there is a creed and approved practices. So what you hear about individual practices here and there is not about the religion. People practice their religion in very, very different ways. So whatever was said, this is simply my answer to the question. Whatever was said, okay, whatever was said by one individual, even if you see a pattern, that doesn't mean it's about the church or it's about the religion itself. So that's what I would say. With regard to, in fact, in connection to a question that you raised about religion and culture, how could it be reconciled? Evangelical Christianity is not antithetical to Oromo culture. In fact, evangelical Christianity helped the revival and the standardization of language. It contributed to the enrichment of the culture in general. With regard to the Reverend Goodina, after reading, and by the way, I have never seen a theologian with such erudition, such ability to write. I have 7 volumes of his writing at home. Now, after evaluating what he had written on a variety of subjects, I can say that Goodina Tumsa is a complex man with a great sense of morality, an incredible knowledge about world knowledge. I cannot say that I cannot reduce it to this label and say this is what Goodina is, but I can say this about his theology of holistic ministry. What that really means is that human individuals have needs, spiritual and physical needs. And the way he approached, at least his church approached, serving the spiritual and the physical needs of human beings is to serve both. So the secular education is to serve the physical and the present needs of a human being. That's what it is. An educated man would be able to find employment, support a family. That's this worldly affair. But the spiritual aspect is about salvation, and that is about the timeliness of life in the next. But his approach is both, serving the physical and the spiritual needs of a person. He calls it integrated human development.
The chairman of the whole thing, I'm only a chairman for a session, so the chairman of the whole thing is complaining. We're going to stop here. Unfortunately, we're going to. And first, make an announcement.
An announcement. This conversation will continue, and it's very important, and I'm convinced that it's very important that the Oromo have this conversation. The Oromo is the most diverse, and we have so far managed it. We can really develop a model for that region. Don't despair if you do not get your questions answered today.
Please give them a round of applause. We are very proud of all of them. A very interesting discussion. I know many of you have questions. I know there are a lot of controversies surrounding this issue. I know many things are unanswered, probably. So the conversation will continue. One announcement, the Oromo Community House has some education about Oromumma going on after this. So they ask you, especially the youth, to go there. They told me Dr. Gammachu Magarsa will be there. All OSA members, please do not leave. OSA members, we have only...
Inuma tikse emaleku lato ashufe bata loninga apisu.
Please do not leave.
Inuma rafe emaleya lami tokuma dabu namara apisu. Allayan allayuma maltu allaya anuru fajadai alagana laguma Alagaana lagumaa maaltu alagaadhaan fira jedhee obbortaa ormi namaa baatu yoo abbaan ofii baattate malee roorroo ormarraa dhufte roorroo diinarraa dhufte maaltu namaa dhoo abbaadho.